Welcome time travelers and welcome new time travelers. As always, if you're new to this channel and enjoy learning history from not only the US but around the world, then don't forget to hit that like button, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado, let's get into it. Passed on this day in 1521, the Edict of Worms banned the writings of Martin Luther, not to get confused with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a German cleric whose efforts to change the church led to the Reformation and declared him an outlaw, and Herrick, who was to be captured. 1703 is when English diarist and naval administrator Samuel Pepys, celebrated for his diary, passed away at the age of 70. 1868 is when the impeachment trial of U.S. President Andrew Johnson, who had been accused of, among other things, of bringing into disgrace, ridicule, hatred, contempt, and reproach to Congress of the United States, ended with his acquittal in the Senate. 8 years later, in 1876, the Challenger expedition, a groundbreaking oceanographic exploration cruise carried out by the British Admiralty and the Royal Society, concluded successful. 1895 is when American photographer Dorothea Lange, whose portraits of displaced farmers during the Great Depression greatly influenced later documentary and journalistic photography, was born. 2 years later, in 1897, Irish writer Bram Stoker published the Gothic horror classic Dracula, which became the basis for an entire genre of literature and films about vampires. Now, 1907 is when motion picture actor John Wayne, who's embodied the image of the strong, taciturn cowboy or soldier, was born in Winterset, Iowa. 6 years later, in 1913, Actors Equity Association, the trade union for American performing artists, was founded. 1926 is when jazz musician Miles Davis, a trumpeter who was one of the major influences on jazz from the late 1940s, was born in Alton, Illinois. The following year, in 1927, the Ford Motor Company ended production of its famous Model T, which had helped democratize the automobile. My grandmother's one neighbor, across the street from her, and a couple houses down, had a Model T. I actually took a ride in that too. Now, this is back when I was a little tight. Moving on to 1938, the House of Un-American Activities Committee was created with Martin Dies Jr. as its chairman. It invested alleged communist activities, and perhaps its most celebrated case was that of Alger Hiss. 2 years later, in 1940, during World War II, the British began to evacuate their troops from Dunkirk, France. 1942 is when General Erwin Rommel hurled his Afghan corps against British forces in Libya in a new offensive against Allied desert armies. 8 years later, in 1950, UK drivers cheered the end of fuel rations. In 1960, the U.S. State Department announced that the U.S. is speeding relief to victims of severe earthquakes and tidal waves in southern Chile. 1966 brought us formerly a colony of the Dutch and later the British. Guyana gained its independence. And finally, 2008 is when American director, producer, and actor Sidney Polk, who helmed a number of popular films, including The Way We Were, that came out in 1973, Tootsie in 1982, and Out of Africa in 1985, passed away at the age of 73. And with that, I will see you in the next one.